Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Brock Landers 41. Brock, it's a pleasure to have you on, my friend.
The Business of Betting podcast is proudly brought to you by the Betfair Hub from Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you want expert articles from pro punters, from building automated models to betting psychology, check out the Betfair Hub. betfair.com.au/hub. Gamble responsibly.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Brock Landers 41. Brock, it's a pleasure to have you on, my friend.
Pleasure to be on, Jake. Thanks for having me. I never thought I'd be on one of these episodes so quickly. This was kind of like a long-term goal, but this is awesome. Couldn't be happier to be here.
No, thank you. It's fun because obviously we've met a few times here in Jersey and obviously been doing different podcasts throughout the sports betting world over the last few years. So it's fun to get together and have a chat about all things betting. Plenty of people know you from Wager Pager, obviously, and prominent on Twitter these days. I think your co-host often jokes about having the most outs in New Jersey, so plenty of people have probably heard you talking before. But before we get stuck into some of the more betting-specific topics, just tell us a little bit about you. You know, growing up on the East Coast, I would imagine, and what that was like, and how that led towards a life in betting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been born and raised in New Jersey, North Jersey, Passaic County, lived here my whole life. And I guess it's, part of your culture growing up is you eventually get into the gambling in some aspect or another. I think it started probably maybe in middle school, ran like a NBA finals bracket with a couple kids in class and stuff like that. And then that turned into fantasy baseball when I got to high school and fantasy football. And I think it was probably at the age of maybe 17, my father taking me to the racetrack on Friday nights when the thoroughbreds would be at the Meadowlands. And, it was kind of, let me show you how to read a racing form. So that turned into another hobby as I got older. And, found myself going to the racetrack on the weekends and, you hit a pick four and that's a good feeling. And, that kind of just branched into everything. And then I've always been a huge sports fan, like I said, and, taking the trips to Vegas and going out there to bet on a Sunday and seeing what that was like. And, it's crazy how far we've come. I'm 31 now, just to see what has gone on since, the age of 17, going from horses to fantasy to where we are now with legalized sports betting is incredible. It's been a dream.
So tell us about the horse racing part, because oftentimes people are sports fans, sports bettors, and horse racing doesn't seem to have had necessarily the same trajectory as it has in my home country in Australia or other parts of Europe like the UK and so on, where often a lot of those bookmakers will have, lopsided betting towards horse racing over the years. It's getting closer towards 50-50 or better on sports, but here now anyway, I mean, obviously people have probably heard of TVG and Naira bets and a few of the other options that are available. But from your point of view, what was obviously you talked about how you got involved at the Meadowlands and that type of thing, but the path to horse racing, is it a common thing? Did you have a group of 5, 10, 15 buddies that would follow it, or was it just one of those things that was unique to you and your experience?
No, it was just pretty much unique to me growing up. I mean, my father had ties to, horse racing when he was younger, and it was the thing for him to do kind of. So he kind of passed that on to me, and that's kind of where I started. And then not until probably I would say maybe I got into my mid-20s, maybe more of my friends would be like, hey, I went to the horse racing track, and have you ever gone before? Have you ever bet? And I'd be like, I grew up 17 with a racing form in my hand. I'll tell you anything you want to know about how to handicap a race, So it was kind of as I got older, more people kind of accepted it a little bit more. But I mean, I could tell you stories 17, 18 years old. I mean, I went to Seton Hall. I'd go to afternoon class, be out by 2:00, Breeders' Cup weekend. I would drive straight to the racetrack by myself to go bet the Breeders' Cup races. So I definitely was a horse racing fan, probably in my earlier gambling days.
Yeah, no, a lot of parallels to many, I'm sure, who are listening. And it's funny. I think horse racing, at least in Australia, UK, and some of these parts, has a bigger impact on people than they think when it comes to gambling, because it's multi-dimensional. There's multi-factors when it comes to a horse race. Obviously, if you just look at the individual form of one horse and or one race collectively, like there's a lot going on there. Similar in some ways to sports, but I think where it does differ is just the different betting options that are typical and common in horse racing. You said before, some of the different pick options, obviously the quinellas and trifectas and all these different things. You got to think through the different nuances of what's going on the racetrack, and oftentimes, at least my experience, there's a race every 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes all around the country. So you got to be on your toes when it comes to this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that would always be the craziest thing too. I mean, everybody I'd go with friends sometimes in the summer to Monmouth, and they'd be like, "You're all over the place. You're playing Saratoga, you're playing over here, you're playing over there. How do you keep up with all of it? We're here at Monmouth. Why don't you just play Monmouth?" And I'm like, there's different horses, different tracks, and it's just there's always something going on, which is always pretty cool with horse racing.
So do you still follow it these days? Like, are you a Triple Crown kind of following it, or you follow in detail to this day?
Yeah, I was gonna say my interest in it has probably gone way, way back. I was definitely more into it when I was like in my early teens, and even, probably up until I was like 21, 22. I would always follow, what 2-year-olds were coming up into the following year, and Triple Crown season, and all that stuff, and, the Breeders' Cup races. But now, I mean, I'm lucky if I probably play maybe 4 or 5 horse races a year. I still try to keep some, track on it. Again, my dad follows it a lot more. We still have our horse racing talks of, who's down in Florida and who's winning races, and trainers that, from the past that we still see in the paper and stuff like that. But I would definitely say right now, I mean, it's such a minute part of my sports betting type stuff that it's like, I'm probably behind the curve from where I was when I was in my teens.
Yeah. Well, before we get on to sports and betting and fantasy and that type of stuff, are there any tracks that are must visits? I know plenty of people talk about Saratoga and the options up here on the East Coast or the Northeast, but Del Mar, and there's obviously some in Kentucky and down in Florida. Are there any that you've been to that are must visits?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't been West Coast. That's pretty much like probably at this point like bucket list for me so far. Like I would love to go to Del Mar and Santa Anita and all the great places out there. I haven't been west. But I've been to Gulfstream plenty of times. Gulfstream is beautiful. I can't recommend that enough. I've been to Florida Derbies and stuff like that down there. So that's always a treat to go to when I want to get away from the Northeast weather up here in Jersey. But as far as, New York, you have to go to Saratoga in the summer. That's definitely a must. I went up there with some friends about 2 years ago, and they don't even like horses, and they were blown away by, how much fun it was going to Saratoga for the day. And still my favorite, though, to this day is Belmont. That's just such a historic track, and just so cool seeing all the ivy on the wall and just knowing what's taken place there over the years and how like original it is. And then, me being a Jersey guy my whole life, Jersey kid, you got to throw Monmouth Park in there. That's another one. It's historic. I'm sure a lot of people will probably have their criticism of it, but that one's near and dear. Just a short drive down the shore to see some horse racing in the summer.
Yeah, I've been there a few times now, and it's funny because there's never anyone there, but also there's always a bunch of old guys there with their hats on. There's some have like walking sticks and canes, and I usually randomly just go up to them and start talking about horse racing, and they love it. Like they absolutely love it. They obviously know I'm not from around here kind of guy, but they are, been going to the same booth in the same track for 30, 40 years sometimes, and you can just feel the enthusiasm coming out of their bones when they talk about horse racing, which you obviously don't find very much anymore, which is sad.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, there you'll definitely find your hardcore guys there. I definitely like betting more at the actual track where live races are. It's always kind of a weird scene. You go to the Meadowlands and there's simulcasting. Like that's just a whole nother breed of people that you're gonna meet there. But yeah, I mean, meeting guys at the track and just talking horses and stuff, like you said, it's rare these days to find lifers like that.
So tell me about sort of through high school and university, that period of time when, because one of the things that shocked me the most in my first like full year living in the US was it's seasonal in terms of sports, obviously, but it's interesting and unique across every sport. So you talked about, I think you said NBA Finals brackets, obviously March Madness. There's bracketology. The president of the United States fills out a damn bracket, for God's sake. Like it's to that level. And then obviously fantasy football is pretty crazy. And I haven't done much fantasy baseball, but I know that's sort of where it all emanated. And people talk about rotisserie leagues and all this sort of stuff. And I'm in a 32-team season-long NFL fantasy league where everyone has their own team. And there's just a wide array of stuff that goes on. Super Bowl squares coming up here shortly as well. So how has all of that impacted you? Because there's so many different things you got to manage. Did you try and follow all these different sports, have all these fantasy leagues, have all these sort of player evaluation, drafting? You've got to come up with sort of strategies and ways to approach it. Do you think that's sort of helped you over the years as you look back on all those different types of, in variations, they're betting options or ways to be, have skin in the game?
Yeah, I think it was a good way to actually start out because, it was one of those things. I mean, you're growing up, you're a kid, you watch a lot of sports every night. You're playing video games like crazy where, that was pretty much the only video games I ever played growing up were all sports games. So I always knew, third string tight ends and stuff like that. And, this guy is always, pretty good in this game. Maybe I'll draft him next year. And then that just turns into, you find a couple more kids that in high school who are into it, and they're like, hey, we should have a fantasy football league. And then that turns into my friend has one and my other friend has one. So, I mean, you go into that type of aspect, and then, you want to win. You want to win the money at the end of the day. So it's like you could kind of over some time kind of see where people's weaknesses were. And that was the thing. I was always able to focus on pretty much fantasy baseball because it was every spring. So like March, April-ish, right after Super Bowl, I'd start all my fantasy baseball stuff. And that would just be, I'd get Street and Smith books, if anyone remembers those things, which would just basically be big team previews on all the baseball guys and stuff like that. And, and that's kind of what happened. You translate all that and you win a couple leagues. And, at the end of the year, you're getting, somewhere probably between like 500 and $1,000 for a kid going into grade school, into high school, into college, and you win a couple of those, and it's like, now what can I do? I want to win again. So it was definitely a good prep for probably where I'm at now.
How did sports betting start? Obviously, there's variations of betting going on in these different ways and shapes and forms. But when it came to sports, do you remember the earliest times of placing bets on teams? Were you betting your teams, or were you betting more sophisticated ways back then, or did that take some time for it to evolve?
Believe it or not, that did take a lot of time, and it's kind of funny how I got into that transition of it. I want to say probably when I got out of college, which was probably like 2011, 2012-ish, I got contacted by a friend I went to high school with, and he said, you like football, right? So I said, yeah. And he goes, I'm at work with 50 people, and it's a pick 'em pool against the spread. And I was like, I don't really know too much about like spreads and stuff like that. I'm not sure how I would do, but I do watch a lot of football. So I joined it that first year, and like I finished terrible. Like I was nowhere in the hunt. And I was like, I watch football every Sunday. I watch all these games, and I know the players, and it just doesn't make sense to me. So somehow I stumbled upon, believe it or not, Gil Alexander's Megapod podcast.
Yep.
And I listened to that for like, a week, let's just say like a week 3 episode or something like that. And I was hooked. I heard Gil talking about the games and which ones to avoid, and, their handicapping spots and all this stuff. And I kind of used that to start shaping. And long story short, I ended up winning the pick'em pool, I think 2 out of the next 3 years. So winning all that money was like, whoa, like this is something. I went from not being really able to figure out betting to kind of, I'm kind of into it now. And then, I ran into a friend who actually moved back into my town from, grade school. And one day we go out for one night to get drinks at the bar. And he's like, oh, I took the under in this game. You got any action on it? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he was like, you don't bet? So I was like, no, I do like pick'em pools and stuff like that when football comes around, but I don't even know where I would go to like, get money down on an actual side or a total. And then he was like, I could put you in touch with somebody. And then that turned into pretty much where I started sports betting, religiously. And I mean, I took my lumps, man. I learned, a valuable lesson. Now looking back, I'm like, I'm such an idiot. I had one book to basically use, and like, I look back at it and, just being shaded on half points and stuff like that. And but that's how you learn, You want to get to that point where why am I losing, this and that. And I think everything just really started though from Gill's thing, and then that kind of branched out, and just wanted to learn more about it.
It's crazy to think how much things have evolved, even in like 10 years, like the last decade,
Yes.
in terms
Yeah.
of A, content. Like Gil's show, I had a similar experience. I remember I used to listen to 1080 The Fan in Australia, driving to like university or high school age type stuff. And it was two guys in Oregon. I don't even remember their name, but they would talk about Oregon football all day. And I would just listen to those guys, for hours and hours while I was driving or while I was doing other stuff. And then I similarly found sort of those sort of handicapping shows, and then from there the Australian versions of that and so on. But it's crazy how that was what it is back then to today, where there's so many podcasts, there's so much content. There's plenty of bad stuff, but there's also plenty of good stuff. And it's wild to think that almanacs and books and annual reports and reviews were the way we used to do things to these days, where it's accelerated so much. You can sort of go on Twitter and find a lot of things if you know where to look.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I said, I mean, I sound like I'm like it doesn't sound that far away talking about like 2012 out of college, but I mean, we're already almost 10 years into that, and it's like so much has changed since then.
Yeah. So what was the culture like around betting, either through those earliest years of it? Because it seems like the more I get into it, in terms of places like Jersey, Philly, Pittsburgh, anywhere in Ohio, obviously Nevada and whatever else, but a lot of those places, it's pretty much ingrained into the week to week when it comes to sports.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too. I mean, like I said, my friend gives me one account basically when I'm, 23 or whatever that was, 22, 23. And, then that sparked to, oh, another guy I work with has an account at, this. And then every day at work, it's who you betting tonight? What do you like tonight? Who did you get this weekend? And oh, look at this parlay that, just missed by one team. We'd have those conversations at work, and, you'd hear it. And, same thing. I'd hear kids in the gym talking about it, and I'd be like, "You have a book?" And oh, let me get that account. Blah blah blah. So like, it's ingrained in everybody here, kind of in a weird way. And now that everything is legal, I mean, more than ever, are you hearing gambling talk, sports betting talk everywhere, anywhere you go, bars, anywhere. You're going to hear somebody talking about whatever game is on TV.
Yeah, and it's funny because I would imagine so many people now in this current day and age with the legal bookmakers are at a similar point to all of us when we started out, whether it was high school age or a bit before or a bit after, but they're all at that earliest point, and you can sort of tell a lot of the time when you talk to friends or colleagues or other people about it, and you can sort of say, yeah, that used to be me actually, and plenty to learn, and hopefully they get on the right track. But what do you think about sports betting and the industry allowed you or made you or forced you onto the right track when it came to trying to get better, trying to improve? Because I'm sure there's plenty of guys in their 40s and 50s and 60s with those outs that they got over the years that are still betting the parlays or still betting the the massive favorites when they're sort of overinflated at the Sunday night games and stuff like that. There's obviously a point in time where you say, you know what, I'm not that interested in losing anymore, or I'm not that interested in being a sucker for too much longer.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make, Jake. And I do think that the average person, unfortunately, they just don't want to get to that next level. I think they're content, and they just go, well, everybody loses, and everyone's going to have their good weeks and their bad weeks and blah 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 blah. But I mean, I wasn't an idiot. I mean, I went to school, I minored in business, and I said to myself, there's something just not adding up here, that it's just so inconsistent, where there's these weeks where things go great, and then there's these weeks where I'm down, I'm down, I'm down. So I was, I guess, maybe that 1% of the average, let's say if you had 10 people lined up, I was probably the one guy who said, no, I want to get better. I want to learn what I'm doing wrong. I want to learn how these people become professionals. And I think stumbling upon shows like VSiN and reading books and, listening to, I'm not trying to give you your own plug, obviously, but listening to great shows like this with professional guys who are kind of revealing behind the curtain just a little bit, and you just pick up on those tidbits, and you're like, let me try this, let me hear this, let me try to get better at that. And that is a big mistake that I make, is doing this. So I think I'm probably, again, a small sample size of the square guy who wanted to actually learn and do what was right. And I think that didn't really set in until I started hearing about sports maybe becoming legal in Jersey, which was like talked about for a while. And I was like, if it ever goes legal, I want to be able to get to that point where I know what I'm doing and I'm not going to make mistakes and I'm not going to do things that I'm doing now. And like, so much of legalization solved so many problems. I mean, you get to the point where now there's 18, 19 books, and like, that's a huge way to become a better is having just the outs to do it. And, I think that I had definitely a lot of good influences and a lot of good things that I picked up from different places. But I mean, I could tell you too, like, I put in a lot of time. I put in a lot of work. I mean, I would literally come home at the end of the night, exhausted, tired, and I would literally just go on, the odds checking sites, and I would literally look at every NBA game and go, wow, this total opened up at 240, went down to 238, went down to 235, went back up to 237. Like, I analyzed line movements and I wanted to see what was going on in games. And I mean, I think that's just another common thing that someone's going to mistake when they go to a sports book. They're going to see the number that's on there and they're going to think that that's the number, but it's like, no, you have no idea. That number has already been manipulated like, 5 times in the last 24 hours. Like, that 240 you see was 235 3 hours ago or something like that. So I just think that the average person just doesn't want to put in the time to do that. And I mean, I went through a lot of trial and error of just doing that. Why did this game close here, and what happened from here to here? Oh, this guy was out. That was an injury. That's why the line moved. And you get to that point where the people who want to get better will do things to get better. And I mean, I think that goes for anything in real life. If you want to get, great at something, you need to put in the time and you need to put in the effort and you need to listen and you need to read. And, so much of gambling is mental too. I mean, there's a mental aspect that you have to go through, and that takes years to get to that point.
Did you focus on specific sports or even markets within that? You talked about, an NBA total, for example, or was baseball more of a focus when you were sort of developing your betting acumen throughout those years? Or how did you want to allocate your time to be able to improve, throughout those years?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing was, I was never really anybody who watched college sports that big. It was always just, I only really knew pro teams, pro players, and like I said, I'm a big baseball guy, football, basketball. So I was just sticking kind of to that stuff. But I mean, again, you listen on VSiN or something like that, and you hear that it's like, well, betting NFL sides is not the greatest thing to try to attack. And I was like, okay, bingo, stop betting NFL sides. Let's focus on, maybe first halves. Maybe let's focus on totals. Let's go somewhere around there. Same thing too, like baseball money lines. I mean, those things are so, ever changing and crazy to try to hit a side straight up. But, if you focus on the total, you might have a better chance of cashing tickets. And then I think it got to the point where, I think I heard somebody on a podcast once say, like, betting the WNBA is probably one of the best edges you can have. And I mean, originally you snicker at that and you're like, who really can name the WNBA teams? But then you say to yourself and you look at it and you're like, wow, there's not that much information about there. And when you do have good information in a small sport like this, you could really cash tickets, at a much better clip than the pro sports. So I would say in probably like the last 5 years, I've gotten way more into college basketball, college football, WNBA, and stuff like that. And you like I said, you just kind of learn that the pro sports that you grew up watching aren't really the best ones to bet on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right, exactly right. The more people that are focusing on it, the more eyeballs makes it a lot more efficient and far more difficult. But I guess humbling yourself in a sense to go and bet on WNBA, or saying, you know what, I can't beat NFL on Sundays. I'm going to have to try first quarter or first half markets or something else. That in and of itself seems like a difficult thing for everyone to want to do.
Yes.
But ultimately, they're the kind of decisions that you need to make if you want to switch over from being a rec to a semi-professional or whatever you want to call it through to a professional, whatever the level people want to get to. You gotta make those decisions at some point along the way.
Right. And again, like I said, the average person right now in New Jersey who bets, they can't really grasp that. It's always, well, I want to bet this game that's on at 8 o'clock tonight that I'm going to go watch with my friends. What's my best advantage to try to cash a bet? And it's like, sometimes if that's your mentality and mindset, you're really not going to get to the finish line.
So tell me about sort of managing outs. You talked a bit about it before, throughout the earlier years and getting a few different spots to now where there's obviously the legal bookmakers. How much of your time goes into that? Obviously, accounts get closed or things change or whatever it might be, but is that a dominant part of your betting time, or are you still focusing more of it on the analysis side?
No, I mean, so much has to do with just knowing which outs will ultimately benefit you. I mean, I'll be honest, there's 19 legal outs in New Jersey, and I mean, I still keep like three or four ones, that aren't. But it's to the point where I kind of know which number is going to be still available by the time I can process what I need to bet. So it's like, I might not waste my time trying to put in a first half bet at FanDuel, but if I could get it down at, DraftKings or Bet365 or somewhere like that, I'm kind of already like, all right, I can kind of, maybe go more to this book than that. Or again, like I said, I still keep a local, one or two, and I just know, like, don't even try to play, a total there because it's going to be already shaded like a point and a half off of what it should be. So I mean, you kind of get to the point where you know which ones work, and then there's just some apps that I just refuse to use just because it's more of a hassle. I mean, I don't want to put any, like, specific books down, but I mean, some by the time you log in and go through the welcome page and go through here and go through there, it's like it's not even worth my time. But it again, it's good to have outs. I mean, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what about non-traditional ways like different handicapping contests or competitions? Have they become more prominent? Because I know plenty of people talk or have talked about the Super Contest over the years, which is obviously, I still think, Nevada locals only, but the Circa one as well. More recently, there's plenty more options out there. I think there was the DraftKings
Yep.
handicapping competition in Jersey over the last couple of years. But are they things that you might try and focus on as well, where you don't have to worry too much about outs necessarily, and you can potentially make an earn if the pot's in your favor to an extent?
Yeah, so actually funny you mentioned that, Jake. I mean, this year was definitely a good year because I definitely put all my eggs in the basket of, Circa Millions. That was pretty much my goal this year, was to join Circa Millions and join Super Contest. And I'll be honest with you, the whole reason was I know how much attention those contests get, but with all the COVID restrictions that were going on, I said, you know what, the population for this contest to actually maybe finish somewhere decent is more of an advantage. And I mean, going into the flight that I took out around Labor Day, there was still overlays at Circa. And I said, if there was ever a chance to try to do something, it's now. So instead of really betting straight bets just in, books this year, I really just focused on those contests. And I think going forward, I might just keep doing that because it was like a good way to kind of put your action out there on NFL sides to have a more increased payout than trying to beat NFL sides on a weekly basis, rather going season long. But assuming things go back to normal, I mean, Circa had such success this year that contest is only going to get bigger and harder to place in. And, you're going to get to a point where, you're going to need to really go 65, 70% to try to hit some of these, payout windows. I mean, went 60% this year in Circa and finished 35. So I can only imagine next year if you add another 1,000 or 2,000 entries, you're really going to need to have a perfect season, which kind of puts you back into, well, why am I, going
Right.
out to pay the entry fee, pay the proxy, and have to basically go 65, 70% for 17 weeks. So, yeah, I mean, DraftKings is definitely, it seems like the lesser of the Vegas contest, but they're going to start to grow eventually too now, because you're going to be competing with different jurisdictions. Like I think this year's DraftKings contest was Jersey and Pennsylvania and a couple other states that were involved, but I mean there's still like 500, 600 entries. There wasn't much.
So tell me a bit more about the Circa one, because I've obviously followed the Super Contest over the years, and plenty of outlets have done that. But I think Circa's in its first year or two, or maybe I'm getting that wrong. But how did the contest go overall? Did you say you hit 60% and you still finished inside the top 40, but not necessarily close to the top?
Yeah, so this was the second year Circa was doing
Second,
Circa
okay.
Millions, and pretty much the top 10 got the biggest payouts. So if you finished 1 through 10, I mean, you range from, I think, a million at the top to 10,000 down at 10th place. And then 11 through 50 pretty much all split up prices depending on who finished where. So, tied with a couple people at 35 and, got back like 4,000 bucks, which again, it's nothing life changing, but it was just kind of like the simple fact, like feeling good that, hey, there was 3,148 entries out there, and to finish in that top 50, tremendous accomplishment. I mean, it's definitely something that I was extremely proud of, and definitely something I hope to eventually build on in the future. But it made it worth its while, just be able to say that, and the support I've gotten about it was great from so many people. But going forward, who knows? I mean, Circa's, there could be two contests. Who knows? There's going to get to a point where I'm sure there's going to be just more and more people. The attractive thing about Circa is too, there's so many quarterly contests built into it. So if you had a really good, let's say, 4-week stretch where you went 18-2, you could take home like whatever it was, 150,000 bucks. Or if you finished second place in that quarterly contest, you would get 10 grand. So there was definitely more incentives to do the Circa one because there was more payouts and more on a quarterly basis. But Super Contest, I mean, that was always the first one that kind of set the stage for all this, and now they pay out like the top 100. But I look at it differently. If I focused more on the Super Contest this year, I probably would have placed way better money wise in that aspect. So I learned a lesson kind of there, just kind of with contest theory alone. But there's a lot that goes into it.
Are they being well received? Is it going to be a common thing, especially as we get towards 2 dozen, 3 dozen states in the United States that have legal sports betting, and maybe even more pooling of money and that type of stuff, at least, in the longer term? Is it something you think that will take off a bit more and will be far more common for people? Maybe they won't do it at their office as much. They might just do it at their local sports book or something like that.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you got to think though. I guess if your local office, you probably have a better chance of winning. That's for sure. And you're not going to be going up against some super sharp, groups that are out there that have 3, 4 entries in the same contest or something like that, or guys that are grouped up together who are working as a team with maybe 12 entries or something like that. So you run into that aspect of it, but I think they're only going to keep going up more, just because they get publicized more. I mean, you look at how beautiful Circa is, and all the ads and the sponsorships, and the job that they're doing over there is just tremendous. I mean, you know, they're only going to get more people to come into their doors with that stadium swim thing that they built. It looks incredible. So I think they're only going to get more people, and there's also people too that are going to see the downside. I mean, there was some people that I told, I said I paid $1,000 to get an entry, and they were like, "You're crazy! You spent $1,000 to enter a pick'em contest." And for some people that doesn't make sense, and that's a lot of money. But you break that up over a 17-week season, and it's really not that bad. So I think you're going to get some people who may balk at the price, or you may get some people who just decide and say, "Hey, I'm going to take a chance with a shot to win $1 million." I think the guy that won the $1 million in Circa this year, he was a guy who got like furloughed, who was a chef somewhere. So I mean, anyone can win it.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you talked a bit before about the earlier days and where you would find your information. What's that like nowadays? Is there a filtering process to try and get a lot of this information? Because it is pretty noisy out there when it comes to Twitter and even like weekly podcasts that cover different leagues. Like even those are tough to figure out what's useful and actionable, and you can't spend the full 45 minutes going through them all to try and to do that. So what's your normal way of on a week-to-week basis digesting a lot of the important information that'll help you make the betting choices?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, I mean, I'm at the point where I would, I guess my handicapping style would be more of a, I'm a line grinder type guy. I'm gonna definitely be, checking out down best screens and stuff like that, and seeing where the market's going. I mean, I'll be 100% honest with you. When you had your betting event and I met Spanky, my whole entire, theory of how to bet kind of changed off of that. So it's really more to a point of just, watching the screen, seeing what's moving, seeing what looks good, what you can catch at some of these books. I mean, I'll be honest with you, that's pretty much half of the battle now. I mean, the days of me going out and looking up baseballreference.com for hours and looking at, advanced sabermetrics and stuff like that. I mean, everything is pretty much factored into that line. And I mean, I think a lot of people need to understand that, what you may think is not in the line is already in the line. And like, you're going to need information that's not factored in there if you're really going to, do something crazy and, beat the line consistently. But I mean, for the most part, yeah, the more books you have and the more you can find the inefficiencies, I mean, that's pretty much the name of the game. And I owe a lot of that to Spanky for sure.
So that top-down approach, how many hours do you have to spend on Don Best, on a lot of these odd sites to understand what's happening, how the market's moving, and trying to get those signals that you can use and hopefully fire some shots at your sports books while all that's happening?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, that's probably if somebody were to watch it, like the average person who wants to make money sports betting, they'd probably go, "This is super boring. You just sit in front of a screen all day and you're just looking at all these different books moving and the screen is flashing and this and that, and you're checking books and this and that. Like it's not a fun way to make money." But it definitely takes time. You got to kind of know too when things change. Early morning, a lot of stuff will change, and then there'll be like kind of a lull in the afternoon at certain points, and then keep those Twitter notifications on. Follow those beat reporters and stuff who know that Kevin Durant's going to miss tonight or Kyrie Irving is sitting out again, and now boom, there's your movement all over the screen that the line is dropping instantly. So I mean, a lot of it is just if you're there at the right time, you can catch some stuff. And I mean, it really depends on your schedule. If you're doing a bunch of other stuff, I might have the morning completely open to do stuff and, my afternoon booked up with different type of things. So I'm not really looking at the screen in the afternoon, but so much of it too is just record keeping. I mean, it's amazing how much of a better, pardon the pun, I've become since, legalization and tracking every bet that I make and seeing, where the line closed. Where was I at? Was I way off? Was I on it? Was I, 3 points ahead of it? I mean, so much of that can tell you if you're doing the right thing. And I mean, you do that over time long enough and you'll see the results. You'll see your accounts go up. You'll see your limits coming in. I know, like, I want to say maybe last year, I was betting on like college basketball Patriot League games and like, it's a super small market, but you start beating those lines and you're going to get limited to like $100 if that, on how much you can get down, which becomes discouraging. And, it's true. It does happen. And you get to that point where you're like, now where do I go?
So do you have to actively not bet certain things or choose which shots you want to take just because you want to preserve those accounts, especially if you're working from a top-down point of view where, you're grinding all those different lines and you want to make sure you can make sure that account lasts?
Yeah, and you could do your best job of that, and that's the thing. I mean, I never tried to go in there and like a lot of people go, "Oh, I tried to fire in a dime and they wouldn't take it," and it's like, well, the more you keep trying to fire in dimes and you win a couple your account's going to go through the roof, and they're going to see that you're winning, crazy value on all your stuff. So what I try to do is I try to use like 5 or 6 books. And I mean, it's hard to get down before things change, but you got to kind of put, 200 here, 100 here, 200 there, 200 there. And that's kind of the way you can kind of preserve a little bit. But I mean, it's going to get to a point where, I'm sure the stuff I'm talking about now in a year from now may not still hold up true.
Yeah, well, and even just thinking about, obviously Gil has stood the test of time, and he's probably one of the unique, the unicorns in this space who's been able to do it for a long, long period of time. But even now, Spanky's podcast, you can get stuff online with Captain Jack, of course, and then you've got like Jeff and Rufus doing a show each week, and people can talk about how useful that content is, across the board. But I think there's no doubt it's raised the level and it's raised the understanding and awareness of how all this stuff happens and what people are doing. And I think it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, you and the Wager Pager crew having your own show as well, a lot of that making all of us better at doing this thing. It's interesting how that'll continue to evolve, because if you think about 10 years ago versus today, like even just projecting forward another 5 years in a legalized environment, it's going to be crazy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing too. I mean, just as far as the presentation of the way things are now, I mean, there's a lot of, like you said, you mentioned a lot of great stuff just now. Captain Jack and Bet the Process and all those shows are excellent stuff if you're really trying to take your game to the next level and do this in a long-term approach. Those are all great places, but I mean, just the coverage that you see out there, there's a lot of garbage out there too that people take as gospel, and you wonder if those things will ever go away. I don't think so. But.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, it might help those people that want to put in the work, put in the time, and try and get an earn out of this. They want to continue to have, unfortunately, some of that garbage out there that more people seem to listen to. It's funny how, your stuff, a lot of other people that do good stuff, still is considered niche. Even this podcast is what I would say is a niche podcast. And
Absolutely.
Yet you have, the more generic national or regional stuff that has a far bigger audience that may not be that helpful or that useful. I think it's fair to say, and that might be being kind. But for whatever reason, that's going to be the way it is. And maybe the irony is that'll help a lot of us who want to try and make an earn out of this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you.
One last thing. People that, find you, or people you talk to, or back before COVID you bump into at the different sports books, either in Vegas or the Meadowlands or whatever it might be, what do you tell them when they're thinking about finding their way into this industry? Obviously, Jersey's a little bit more mature than some of these other new markets that are opening up. But if someone's listening to this and they're in one of these states that hasn't legalized yet, that will soon, do you have any advice for those types of people? Because a lot of them will probably be, in their 20s and 30s and about to be hit by a barrage of legal bookmakers, and they would probably be, wise to listen to folks like you that have been through that sort of whirlwind over the last, 3, 5, 7, 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, Jake. It certainly has its advantages, and it also has its disadvantages. I kind of had the dream picture in my mind of, this is great that there's legalized sports books, and if I really get good at my craft, I could definitely maybe do this full time forever, and we're all saved. And then you get to that point where you have a good college basketball season, or you have a really good NBA total season, and things get cut back, and it's like, all right, this is not what I expected. And, my local guy will still take more money than, what this person will take. And, I'm back to meeting up every Monday with, trying to settle up accounts and this and that. So I think, though, a lot of it, though, has to do with, it's what the bettor wants to do. Like, what is their end goal? If you just want to be somebody who says, hey, you know what? I hate, betting with money I don't have and going over my head and over betting. Legalized sports books are great. You could post up your money. You can't get crazy with things. A lot of these apps have really good, features where they could lock how much you deposit over a week, over a day, over a year, all that type of stuff. So there's definitely a lot of good that comes with it, but I would just be cautious. If you think that, just because now there's legalized gambling and you know what you're doing, that, you're going to be making 6 figures a year just betting at FanDuel and DraftKings, it's not going to happen. You're still going to have to do a lot of work. And, that seems to be what happens. You get to that point where you're good, and now it becomes, well, how do I get more money down? And it goes, like we said, talking about Captain Jack earlier, it becomes art versus the science of it. So I would just be cognizant of really what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to have fun, it's definitely, it's great. You could bet on so many different things depending on jurisdiction, first touchdowns and stuff like that. A lot of people love doing that and they're fun bets and stuff like that. But I would just definitely be weary of what your end game is, kind of, and that's probably the best way I could put it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Brock. It's fun catching up. It's always good to talk betting here in Jersey and across the US, and hopefully we see you with one of those oversized checks soon, winning one of those contests in Vegas or here in Jersey.
Absolutely, that would be great, Jake. I can only hope, and it's been a real pleasure being on this show. A huge fan of the show. I'll be honest with you. I've listened to pretty much every episode since episode 1, and I'll be honest with you, through COVID, everything being closed so many times in the summer, just re-listening to old stuff that I did, and re-listening to so many good guests that you've had over time. And this is definitely one of those podcasts that I tell people, if you want to get better, listen to people that Jake has had on, listen to what these people preach and practice. And it definitely helped me tenfold. Like I said, this stuff is evergreen, that you could go back to it and listen to it, and it'll help you. And there's definitely just so much good stuff that has come from this podcast. On behalf of everybody that's ever listened, I can't thank you enough.
You're a good man. I appreciate it a lot, Brock, and hopefully we get to catch up soon, have a beer, and enjoy the old world as it was. So thanks again for your time, buddy, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jake.